The coronavirus is threatening Beijing-centered globalism. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. So we're going to take a look at China's globalist ambitions and how the coronavirus is causing those ambitions to all but collapse. Now, before we get into the details, make sure you go right now down below and click on the link to my special website featuring My Patriot Food Supply. They've been a great friend to this channel, and they're precisely the resource we would all want in the midst of these insane outbreaks like coronavirus. And the one thing that everyone has to be very cognizant of is the risk of empty shelves in response to widespread panic over pandemics. And My Patriot Food Supply completely moves that risk. They completely do away with it. Their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. They include breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And to make it even better, they're offering you 40% off a 2-week emergency food kit when you go to my special website by clicking on that link below. Preparing for emergencies has never been easier and never been more affordable. So take action today by clicking on that link below and save 40% off with their 2-week emergency food kit. I've got mine. Make sure you get yours. All right, so here is the latest on the coronavirus. There was an enormous spike in the number of infections last night, about 15,000 new cases. Now, as I understand it, this is largely because of how the case numbers are being counted. Up until now, patients with the virus were confirmed by lab tests finding the virus in swab samples. But now they're diagnosing it via lung scans. And so that's why there was such a massive jump. At least that's what we're being told. Moreover, there have been over 250 more confirmed deaths. So in terms of totals, as of now, 60,000 have been reported as infected. Again, the actual number is probably 10 times that. That's the rule of thumb when you're dealing with Beijing. Whatever official numbers they're putting out there, they should be multiplied 10 times. So officially, we're looking at about 60,000 confirmed cases with a death toll just shy of 1,700. Now, needless to say, this pandemic, this outbreak, is threatening China in a number of ways, but most especially, it's threatening Beijing-centered globalization. Now, if we take a step back here and get a big picture perspective, I'm very appreciative of the Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho, who argues that the world is characterized today by actually 3 different versions of globalization. So there's Western globalization, that's more an economic globalization of mass transnational corporations and centralized political systems like Washington, D.C., Brussels, and all. Then you have a Chinese version of globalization, and that's attempting to reconfigure the political and economic world around Beijing. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's called China's Belt and Road Initiative, okay? The Belt and Road Initiative is China's version for a Beijing-centered political and economic world order. So at one level, the Belt and Road Initiative involves building railways across Eurasia, as well as buying up shipping ports around the world to build their own terminals. But of course, the whole point of the Belt and Road Initiative is to develop such strong economic ties with other countries so as to align their political interests with the interests of China. So they're combining their own political and economic structures that are attempting to reconfigure the world around Beijing. So you have a globalism that centers on Brussels, as it were. Then you have an alternative globalism that centers on Beijing. And then Olavo argues that there's a third globalization, and that is, of course, Islamic globalization, which is a religious globalization. And if you're familiar with the 3 trends that we look at on an ongoing basis on this channel, political, economic, and traditionalist/religious trends, these 3 globalizations all seem to line up, right? They all correspond to these trends, however loosely. So Beijing offers a kind of Stalinist political-based globalization. Orlando and Disneyland and Amazon and Coca-Cola and all of these Western transnational corporations represent a more economic-based globalization. And the Islamic world represents a religious or traditionalist-based globalization. It's very, very interesting. But What is important here is that the emergence of the coronavirus is really putting a tremendous amount of stress on Beijing-centered globalism. The Guardian is reporting that China is experiencing its first quarter ever of negative growth, and China's ambassador to the World Trade Organization has actually had to plead with other countries not to use the coronavirus as an excuse to put up trade barriers. And again, as the Guardian reports, the very fact that China felt the need to plead with the world not to do that, not to put up trade barriers, means that they suspect that the coronavirus is becoming an occasion for some backdoor nationalist protectionism. Now, if you're interested, we did a video on this, okay? We analyze how the coronavirus is actually speeding up the process by which nationalism is sweeping the world. I'll link the video down below for you in the pinned comment section as well. But what we're seeing is nothing short of a massive surge in border closings and border security enforcement literally throughout the planet, which is highly reflective of the rise of nationalist sentiments. So externally, China's beginning to see the world turn more and more away from Beijing and building up these walls. And internally, the nation is feeling the worldwide shunning. Financial markets in China have fallen dramatically, and the nation as a whole is in a collective lockdown. The Gateway Pundit is reporting the flight logs out of Hong Kong's international airport. So the Hong Kong Immigration Department releases daily passenger arrivals and departures at the Hong Kong airport, which is one of the top-ranked airports in the entire world. And if you can believe it, on January 24th, so just before the coronavirus became internationally known, on January 24th, the number of arrivals and departures was around 257,000. On February 12th, after the virus took hold, that number dropped dramatically to a mere 4,000. So the world-class Hong Kong airport, for all intents and purposes, has been shut down. In addition, major tourist attractions like the Forbidden City in Beijing has been closed down. So there's no question that China is suffering not just from an epidemic, but also from the beginnings of a meltdown of its own version of a Beijing-centered globalism. Perhaps nowhere are we seeing this erosion more than in the Chinese government leadership. And this entire insanity really is calling into question the whole capacity of China's one-party rule to actually effectively rule. And what this means is that the Chinese leadership isn't just trying to contain a virus. They're trying to contain the massive dissatisfaction with the government, which threatens to boil over. It's widely recognized that China missed the best opportunity to contain the spread of the virus because Chinese officials were so slow in admitting a virus had actually emerged. By the time the government made the public aware of the virus, it was too late, right? And people are now learning that government officials knew about this outbreak, and yet Wuhan officials still went ahead with a major banquet that involved over 40,000 families, which of course put everyone involved at immediate risk, not to mention an untold number of those who could be later exposed as a result of the public event. So you do have people coming out and boldly declaring, like we did in another video, that this is China's Chernobyl, right? When Chernobyl was in many respects the final straw. It was the final disaster that revealed the Soviet Union to be itself the disaster back in 1986, with the Berlin Wall falling just literally months later in November of '89. You see, what's so rotten about this outbreak is how it reveals what's truly rotten with a communist system of government, because they don't have a balance of powers. So there's no recourse to any kind of punitive measures inflicted on someone by government officials higher up the ladder. And so nobody wants to stand out as the whistleblower, right? As a good whistleblower in this sense. Nobody wants to stick out or stand out as the bearer of bad news because they're afraid of reprisals. They're afraid of retaliations from people higher up the ladder. So China tends to have this culture of everything's fine, right? Everything's great. You demand, President Xi. You're right. Everything is awesome. You don't have a meritocracy operating within a balance of power that encourages people, or at least is supposed to encourage people to do the right thing, as it were. And so I think the Chinese are really starting to feel that. So this may definitely be China's Chernobyl. Either way, the coronavirus is significantly damaging the specifically Beijing-centered project or vision of globalization, and whether or not that damage is permanent remains to be seen. Now, before you go, I just posted an awesome video on Angela Merkel and her nightmare scenario. Her hand-picked successor has resigned, and her arch nemesis is now poised to take over and even possibly force early elections. You're going to absolutely love it. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.